Welcome to Conversations with Matt and Katrina. Before we start today, don't forget to visit our website at newinsidestories.com for more in-depth analysis and exclusive content. All right, so let's dive into this shooting outside of Queens Nightclub. You sent over this NBC New York piece, and I got to say the details are really unusual.
Yeah. What's fascinating here is that we're looking at a potential mass shooting where thankfully everyone survived.
Yeah.
10 people shot, around 30 rounds fired.
Hmm.
Those numbers usually paint a much grimmer picture.
Exactly. The article says this all happened around 11 p.m. on January 2nd, outside Amazura nightclub. 3 or 4 young guys just opened fire on a group of people waiting to get in.
And this is where it gets even more interesting. Police sources say the victims, 7 women and 3 men, all in their late teens or early 20s, have no criminal history. They were at a private event for a 16-year-old who was shot and killed back in October.
Wow. That's a chilling detail.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of potential threads here. We've got the October shooting,
Right.
this recent one, and then another possible connection to a 17-year-old shot in Brooklyn earlier that same day.
Right. Police haven't confirmed a direct link between the Brooklyn and Queens shootings, but they do suspect one. It makes you wonder, what could have happened in those intervening hours to escalate things?
And while the police are leaning towards a gang-related motive, none of the victims in Queens had any criminal history. Could this be retaliation for the October shooting? Were they mistaken for someone else?
That's a good question. It's also worth noting that the venue was at capacity with only about 15 people waiting outside. Was this truly random, or was there a more targeted objective? The NYPD has stated their commitment to finding those responsible, and their investigation will hopefully provide some answers.
Hopefully. It's definitely a situation with a lot of moving parts and unanswered questions.
It's really striking, just the randomness of this violence. You know,
Yeah.
these victims were just standing outside a nightclub. They weren't involved in anything illegal, according to police.
Yeah, that's true. And it brings up the point about the ages of those involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're talking teenagers and young adults. This is a time in their lives where they should be looking forward to the future, not caught up in this kind of violence.
Right, and that's the tragedy here. The potential of these young lives is being overshadowed by fear and violence. But this also presents an opportunity, I think, to examine the deeper issues at play. What are the root causes that are leading young people down this path?
The lack of opportunity, the allure of gang life, the ease of access to firearms, all of these things definitely contribute to the problem.
Absolutely. But it goes beyond those factors. We need to consider the systemic issues that create these environments, where violence feels like the only option. Poverty, lack of education, inadequate mental health resources, all of these things play a role.
So where do we go from here? What can be done to break this cycle?
Well, that's a question that has plagued communities for decades. There's no simple answer. But it starts with addressing those root causes. We need to invest in programs that provide opportunities for young people, create safe spaces, and offer alternatives to gang life.
Another thing that's interesting about this particular shooting is that while it's obviously a horrific event, the fact that all the victims survived allows us to examine the complexities of gun violence without the added weight of loss of life.
Yeah, it's a good point. We can focus on the motivations behind the shooting, the ripple effects it has on the community, the systemic issues that contribute to this kind of violence, and hopefully that can lead to a more productive dialogue about solutions.
And speaking of solutions, it's not just about law enforcement. It's about community involvement, supporting organizations that are working to address these issues, and having those difficult conversations about race, poverty, and inequality.
Exactly. It's a collective responsibility. We all have a role to play in creating a safer and more just society.
We were talking about those potential connections earlier, and you had sent over that other article about a 17-year-old shot in Brooklyn on the same day. What are your thoughts on how these two shootings might be related?
Well, the police have been pretty tight-lipped about the specifics, but it's certainly a puzzle. But the fact that they suspect a connection is telling. What happened in those intervening hours between the Brooklyn shooting and the one in Queens? Was there some kind of escalation, maybe a confrontation or a threat we haven't heard about yet?
And the timing is interesting, too. The Brooklyn shooting happened around 8:30 in the morning, and then the one outside the club was just after 11 p.m. that night. Could this point to some sort of pattern of escalating violence, maybe between rival groups?
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. And if that's the case, it really underscores the need for intervention and conflict resolution, We need to find ways to disrupt these cycles of violence before they spiral further out of control.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that behind these statistics, behind these incidents, there are real people, real families, impacted by this violence.
Right, and it's not just the immediate victims either. This kind of violence has a ripple effect throughout the community. It creates fear, distrust, a sense of vulnerability that can be incredibly damaging.
So what can we as individuals do to make a difference? It could feel so overwhelming when we look at the bigger picture, you know?
Yeah, it's true. It's a complex issue. But even small actions, I think, can have an impact. Supporting community organizations that are working to address these issues, advocating for policy changes, having those tough conversations with friends and family, these are all ways I think we can contribute to creating a safer and more just society.
Well said. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in breaking these cycles of violence and building a better future for everyone.
Exactly.
This has been a really insightful deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
And for our listeners, don't forget to visit our website at newinsidestories.com for more in-depth analysis and exclusive content. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged,
And stay curious.